Salutations! Welcome to the evolution of blithering thoughts and the Hopeful Humanist Cafe. This is a non sequitur episode through and through. So yeah, welcome to a make you think, one take, blithering moment. I have a couple things I want to thread together, and I think I'm going to go in a little bit of a different order today. I'm going to be doing my walk and talk as I pace back and forth from my office area in the basement, whereas it's usually the central location for my taping of the episodes. But I also like to putter about, and so sometimes I head over to the workshop. Right now, I'm enjoying a moment happy tea from France. Pass the salt. I'm in France. Any reason to talk about France, right? No. But I did get this tea from France. It's got some mango rooibos. Am I saying that properly? Some ginger and chamomile. And I'm very much enjoying it. So there's another podcast. I told you in my last episode about some interesting podcasts for you to check out. The Very Bad Wizards and the Partially Examined Life. There's a Canadian one that I think is becoming quite popular. It's called Two Psychologists, Four Beers. It's been talked about a couple times on the Very Bad Wizards podcast, and I think sometimes they poke and jest. But so the idea is these two psychologists are having some pretty cool conversations with some pretty cool guests, and they're enjoying a beverage together. I'm not sure if you're aware, but often when I'm having my discussions on the Hopeful Humanist Cafe or Blithering Thoughts, I'm enjoying a tea. So that's what I have today. I have my Mon Moment Happy Tea. So I encourage you, if you would like, to grab a tea as well. So yeah, the format's going to be changed a little bit. I'm going to start off with a quote, and then after the quote, I'm going to go to my novel first sentence before I get into the t-shirt. So yeah, here at the evolution of blithering thoughts at the Hopeful Humanist Cafe, we're all about creativity and we're all about happiness. And my hope is to try to do some things that will facilitate creative juice stimulation. And I mean, we don't know a lot about creativity. It's like consciousness. It's one of the areas in which, there's still a lot of room for study. But my thought is, if I throw a quote, if I share a t-shirt idea, and I put out a novel first sentence, maybe I can get people to kind of think outside the box. And hopefully, if you're dealing with some kind of barrier, some kind of challenge, it might stimulate some thoughts to transcend the moment. So I've got a quote today. My last quote also came from this book by Abraham H. Maslow, The Farther Reaches of Human Nature. And I guess when one enjoys a book and they go through it, they're inclined to come across a bunch of interesting things. So it's not surprising that I get another quote from Monsieur Maslow. And it goes like this: facts just don't lie there like oatmeal in a bowl. They do all sorts of things. They group themselves and they complete themselves. An incomplete series calls for a good completion. The crooked picture on the wall begs to be straightened. The incompleted problem perseverates and annoys us until we finish it. Poor Gestalten make themselves into better Gestalten, and unnecessarily complex precepts or memories simplify themselves. So yeah, I was really drawn to this quote. The very first sentence got me. Facts don't just lie there like oatmeal in a bowl. And I've always been inclined to feel that way about facts. I mean, Maslow, to read further in this chapter, he suggests that, the fact often will suggest the ought, like what we ought to do. So if we want to know what, our purpose or meaning in life is, we just need to really sit down and figure out what it is that we are. We have to know thyself. And for me, I've always thought that if we're going to talk about facts and we're going to put facts on the table, my thought has been that at some point there should be some kind of consensus, some kind of agreement. But that doesn't always seem to happen. And I find that really interesting, that someone can state a position, they could put some things on the table, these things called facts, and they should be pointing in a direction, and we should all say, yeah, I see where it's oriented to. I see where it's going, and let's go. Let's go there in that direction and figure out what other things are going to fall into place. Let's straighten the picture on the wall. But that doesn't happen. I was listening to a Sam Harris episode on his podcast, and it's an older one with Jordan Peterson. And for 2 hours, they had a discussion about facts and truth, and they didn't really make any progress. And so I just think it's really interesting for us to ask ourselves, when it comes to a fact, what do we want from a fact? Like, what do we expect from a fact? What makes something a fact? And if we were to know something to be a fact, would it start to suggest some things for us? So when I start thinking about this idea of a fact, I'm thinking about this idea that I got from Yuval Noah Harari in the YouTube video I added as a link with my last episode, and I suggested that perhaps we watch it and we might learn about the lessons for the 21st century. And in there he was talking about another book, I think it's Homo Deus, and in it he talks about, because of technology and the changes that are coming in terms of the future and the displacement of humans from technology and robotics, that there might be this creation of a class that he called the useless class. And so this is a theory. It hasn't completely arrived at that point. I mean, right now we have a situation where people have gigs, what we can call the gig economy. And I was thinking about how, in terms of your reference point, while you're in a gig economy and you wish you could have full-time work, and you can think, well, it's really unfortunate and it's really overwhelming and desperate at times to move from gig to gig. There could be a point that when people they move towards the useless class because there's no places of employment for them to occupy, they could look back longingly, yearningly for the good old gig days when you can move from gig to gig. But once again, I think the whole idea about happiness and creativity is relevant for this idea about the theory that there one day will be a useless class. And my thought about that theory, well, it's not yet a fact, that if it was a fact, one of the qualities that I talked about in the previous episode is that we really need to facilitate, encourage, and foster creativity so that not only people can feel relevant, but they can also occupy space and place in this world so that they can have like a meaningful existence. So we really have to continue to experiment with things that can allow us to probe the depths of our creative thinking. So to that end, I want to start with a sentence, and I'm going to encourage you to go to show notes and look at the sentence. I'm going to introduce this video. I'm going to put the novel first sentence in the introduction for the show notes of this episode. And I think you're going to need to look at it because there are a couple words that I italicize. So yeah, I got really excited about this. So I'm going to just introduce the thought, go to the t-shirt, and then return to the thought because I want there to be an opportunity for some percolation. But I have talked to a number of people about this sentence, or a couple of sentences, And I was concerned that maybe it was grammatically problematic, or maybe it was just a little too utterly confusing. But for the sake of what I'm attempting to achieve, it has to be somewhat ambiguous. So here's the sentence. Bruce's silicon synapses spontaneously started sparking with a gnawing curiosity. Would they accept him? What if they didn't? How could he test the waters with his kids? Maybe he should tell them, your mom's a robot. Okay, so just kind of percolate on that for a second and we'll come back to it. So our t-shirt idea for the day, once again, I guess one of the podcasts, I guess it's apparent that I probably, if not enjoy, I turn to, because I think it provides a lot of food for thought, would be Sam Harris's podcast. And in one of them, they were talking about truth and deception. And it said when with one of these the guests, the idea was, when he was exploring, the nature in which or the structure of a lie, that a lie has to include something that's grounded in the realm of possibility. So he was talking about, the dog ate my homework, and the reason we say that is because people do have dogs. There are these things that we know that are dogs. And, I guess a dog, because they chew things up, could possibly, eat someone's homework. And I kind of thought, wouldn't it be interesting if when people were trying to create a space to say, I didn't do it, and I'm going to give this thing that seems like I'm going to be suggesting that I did it, but I didn't. But I'm gonna fashion in such a way that, it's not even grounded in reality. So maybe I can get out of this situation with a little bit of humor and make whatever amends are necessary, and then move forward. So the T-shirt idea that I have is the unicorn flew away with my homework. My son recently broke his arm when he was at school on the monkey bars, and he got a cast, and he asked me to write something on his cast, and I was like, I don't know, what, I wanted to write the perfect thing, and that became an obstacle. And so I decided, I have to write something. I said, oh, hey, when you go to homework, you can maybe playfully, he did do his homework, but I thought playfully you can maybe share, you didn't get your homework done, and say that your dad provided you with a note about why it didn't happen. And so I wrote on his cast, the unicorn flew away with my homework. So that's my T-shirt idea. Now, the reason I think it's quite fun is because it's so nonsensical. But even in the nonsensical world in which we imagine it existing, there's a whole bunch of other interesting questions that kind of come from it. And once again, this is just an experiment with creativity. Just like, these are kind of like thought experiments. So if we imagine being in that world where the unicorn flies away with a young person's homework, there's certain questions. Well, first of all, I do know that there have been ideas and images presented of unicorns having wings, but maybe there's a little bit of a presumption there. How do we know a unicorn could fly away when in fact unicorns don't exist? Because how do we know, or why would we presume that they have wings? The other thought I had is, if they did fly away, if they do have wings and they flew away with one's homework, what would they do with it? What would possibly, with a dog, we know that maybe the dog just chewing things and it ended up chewing the homework. But if we imagine a unicorn coming into someone's place, how did that happen? How did the unicorn get in the house? And when the unicorn got in the house, did we know the unicorn was in the house? And did it leave a whole bunch of track marks? And And in terms of all the things it could take, why would the unicorn take the homework? What's up with that? Is it planning on getting some kind of free education? Or is there's a limited availability of books in the unicorn library, and this was one especially interesting to the unicorn? So yeah, there's my thought for a t-shirt. The unicorn flew away with my homework. Now, before we get back to the novel first sentence, I'm going to do another taboo activity. I got a word here that I would like to attempt to get you to say from wherever you are, even though I can't hear it. And there are a bunch of words here I can't say because they're taboo. So I picked 4 words, and then I'll take a pause, and then I'll share the words that I wasn't able to say, to see if you didn't get the word, that maybe it will help you get closer to that word. So here are my 4 words. Water cooler, toxic, chatter, mean tails. Okay, so what is the word that I'd like you to say? You got it? Okay, and here, hold it in your mind's eye. I will reveal the word in a second, but maybe you might want to tweak your guess, because here are the taboo words I wasn't supposed to say. Dirt, talk, column, rumors, and grapevine. Okay, so the word was gossip. The word was gossip. Okay, so the most exciting part for me today in terms of this episode is really getting back to the novel first sentence. So when I shared this with some people, one person's response was, "What? What? No, I don't know what's going on." Another thought was, "What's up with all these S's? Silicon synapses spontaneously started sparking. You know, it's a pretty big alliteration you got going on there. Is there something there that I should be honing in on? Is that the central piece of concern in terms of this sentence?" Another person said, "Well, so Bruce told a lie? Well, I don't like that. Bruce should try to figure another way at about getting acceptance." And then another person brought up this idea that Bruce was transitioning. So this was very fascinating to me. So the backstory, let me give you the backstory now. So here's Bruce's silicon synapses spontaneously started sparking with a gnawing curiosity. Would they accept him? What if they didn't? How could he test the waters with his kids? Maybe he should tell him, "Your mom's a robot." So what I'm attempting to capture with this sentence is that Bruce is a robot. And he's arrived at a point where, for whatever reasons, he wasn't programmed to become conscious, but spontaneously some sparks start happening, and then there's this gnawing curiosity. He becomes kind of obsessed, which is something a robot would not do, about his kids accepting him. You know, would they accept him? And he's not sure if he wants to tell them that he's a robot. So he comes up with this thought that he'll test them, and maybe what he should say is that your mom's a robot, so he can see how they respond to that before he admits to them that he's the robot. So in terms of the backstory, everyone's about like, so what's going on here? The idea is that there was this happily married couple, or couple that was married, and from all appearances they looked to be happy. They were smiling, they spent time together, and unfortunately the husband passed away, and then this person, in her sadness and desperation in a future world where this was commonplace, had the option of having a robot. She could get a robot that looked like her husband, that would do all the things that her husband would do, and the kids would have a father, and they wouldn't know the difference, right? Which, I guess there's this idea of deception there, and that becomes a whole other discussion. But I was wondering initially about thinking that, what would happen if the mom had said to the kids, your dad's a robot. And, he was. And how would that affect the kids? Would they accept their dad? Now, a robot being a robot, I guess that's irrelevant. And the focus was more on how that would impact the kids, psychologically, knowing that they thought that there was a certain kind of relationship that was different than they had imagined. But something caught my attention, and I was imagining all of a sudden, like, well, what about from the robot's perspective, right? And this is where the thought experiment is an important kind of activity, kind of just stepping outside of the bounds of the usual. And I imagine that, I thought about, imagine if the robot somehow became conscious. We have that discussion all the time about AI and, what the future will look like. And there's always these fears, but I imagined that there was this robot that invested in his relationship with his kids and his wife, and that he arrived at a point, and so there's the he italicized, right? Is he a he? And are they his kids? We have these questions, and he's concerned, like, will they accept him? He wants to be accepted, a very human thing. And then we can imagine that he comes up with this test because he wants to protect himself. And he does something very human, which at the same time threatens his relationship with his kids, because once they find out that he lied to him, they won't trust him. But all in all, this is all a very human thing for him to do. So paradoxically, he would be seen as acting in a human way, but perhaps would not be accepted because of the deception that he initiated by telling this lie. And when I had shared this backstory, one person identified that she thought, because of the he and him being italicized, that perhaps Bruce wanted to transition. And it made me, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of other interesting thoughts kind of presented themselves. First of all, robots don't have a gender. I mean, that's the way I would understand it. A robot would be a creation, and it wouldn't be male or female. But if we arrived at a point in time where robots were programmed with a male or female kind of perspective, or stereotypes of behaviors that were socially agreed to at that certain historical period in time, what would we do, or how would we respond to a situation where the robot might say, if the robot achieved a level of consciousness, because consciousness is evolving, right? In terms of Yuval Noah Harari, he's identified that the kind of middle class consciousness that exists today in modern times is a consciousness that didn't exist 2 million years ago with Homo erectus or the Neanderthals. And so we have a whole new kind of consciousness now, and there are potentialities of consciousness. So in the future, perhaps there would be a kind of consciousness that doesn't exist, that we can't anticipate, and that might be a form of a robot consciousness. And what would we do if, at that point, the robot had declared the program doesn't sit with the way I want to be oriented in this world? What if the dad robot said, I should be a mom robot? What would we do? And I mean, we could dismiss this as being fantastical thinking. But in terms of a thought experiment, I think it presents an interesting opportunity to imagine an ethical moment in the possible potential future. And really, for me, it's kind of like, how would you like to go forward? as in terms of this human hubris that often exists, in terms of the idea of thinking like there's a supremacy, a human supremacy in terms of consciousness. If there were different kinds of consciousness, we talk about human rights, but maybe at some point we might be talking about consciousness rights and the various forms of consciousness that have to be accorded certain protections, rights, and responsibilities. So it for me became really interesting. I don't have any answers. It continues to leave me in a state of elevated interest, and it speaks to the imagination to wonder what would be the thing to do in terms of remedying that dilemma by putting yourself in all those different positions, putting yourself in the position of the children to find out that a parent would be a robot, to be the parent that has to tell their children that a parent is a robot, to be the robot that perhaps has consciousness and then is concerned about being accepted as being a robot, being accepted as one authentic self. And the idea that, when we program robots, that if there was a certain achievement in a certain kind of thing that we would agree was a form of consciousness, and there was a reaction against the programming in terms of that conscious entity, that kind of an emergent consciousness, what would be our responsibility? I find that quite fascinating. So I leave that with you to think about, and I offer my novel first sentences as possibly something to stimulate some free writing, to get a little bit adventurous. Always the hope is that perhaps with these different activities, they might encourage a person to think outside the box and tackle some kind of barrier or obstacle to transcend that, and to solve a problem, overcome a barrier, to if nothing else, also in terms of happiness, just use that creative muscle, because in terms of creating, there's something very fulfilling that we experience in the process. I thought too that it would be nice to provide a link for a song that might be connected to this, the idea of thinking outside the box and making sure that we're not just caught up in linear thinking. Sometimes when I hear a song, it definitely helps me kind of get out of my usual linear one-track kind of thinking perspective. So I'm going to provide a link for a song by Supertramp. I think it's a pretty cool song, and it's called The Logical Song. And we at times get caught up in one-track linear thinking, and to get outside of that, I think that the song suggests there's a little bit of a danger that's involved in that, because we, from the last episode, we see that Maslow provided a definition about those who are in touch with their creative impulses, that they're often seen as bohemian, kind of. He used the word, and I imagine that some people will be quite uncomfortable with it, but he used the word that sometimes maybe we got to get a little crazy, and that there could be some fruits and some benefits, and I think that would definitely be a important thing to achieve, especially if we're moving towards a point where in the future we might see the rise of the useless class, and I mean it wouldn't be much of a rise, would it? It would be definitely a doldrum place to be. So give a listen to the logical song and try to get some creativity going by thinking about my novel first sentence. And maybe it's time to get a t-shirt that playfully identifies the reason you didn't get anything done today is because the unicorn flew away with my homework. Peace and take care.